Lester Young once told the drummer Willie Jones that jazz was an art, a science, and a philosophy. And Ira certainly embodied all of those things. One thing I remember about Ira's philosophy was shortly after I met him one night when he first started playing the gig at the Rancher. He was outside the club in the Miami night, early morning actually, talking to his entourage, 5 or 6 people that were hanging out with him. And Ira mentioned something. I was about 14 when I heard him say this the first time, that jazz to him, the reason he played jazz was that it was real life music, because it reflected the way real life, how we plan things. We have each day as a structure, and then we end up doing something else because maybe your dog got sick, or something affected your perfect plan for a perfect day, and you had to improvise. And sometimes the day was even more beautiful because that happened. And so jazz is real life music, and that's how Ira lived and played. I'm Bob Mover, continuing our tribute to the great Ira Sullivan, who influenced and enchanted so many of our lives with his beauty as a musician and as a human being. We're continuing with a wonderful piano player, also singer, trumpet player, but mainly a great pianist. And one of my oldest friends, the great Mike Gerber, is with us today. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Bobby.
Yeah, see, I'm still Bobby in Miami to people. And fortunately, I'm not little Bobby anymore. Yes, I used to say I weighed like 200 and something pounds, and people would say, "Oh, is little Bobby coming to the session?" And then I'd show up, this Mr. 5x5. But anyway, Mike Gerber is a very wonderful musician, a real genius, and we've been involved with each other musically and friendship-wise since around 1969 or 70. I think when Mike first came down to the University of Miami, we would break into the practice room together. Actually, we would hide until they closed the door to the practice room, and then let ourselves out at about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning before the janitors came in, and play. We might play the song "As You" in 12 keys that night, but we would definitely keep each other on our toes musically. And I am happy to say that I am the person who introduced Mike to Ira Sullivan. Mike had come in from St. Louis, and I was saying, you have to meet Ira. And I told Ira, there's this young pianist at the university that I'm hanging with a lot, and you should meet him too. So why don't we take it from there, Mike, like how you met Ira? I brought you down to the Rancher. Fill me in. I can't really remember all the details.
We went on a Friday night. I believe it was in October in 1969, and went to the Rancher. Came in. I couldn't believe my ears on the music that I heard. It was so wonderful. I'd never heard anything like that before. They didn't have anything quite like that in St. Louis at that time. So
I figured that, yeah.
So and I heard such proficiency on everything. He could go from flute to flugelhorn, and you almost couldn't even tell that he changed instruments. It was just so beautiful. And he played the saxophones. He played everything. And of course, he played everything that he didn't usually play on the gig. He was a multi-instrumentalist, but not a showy kind of a thing. He really could play them. And
And it wasn't just Mama don't want no saxophone playing around here. You know,
nope.
that Bobby and Duffy, they used to play all those instruments and play 4 notes on them, and everybody say, "Oh wow, he's so talented." But Ira was way light years beyond that, right?
Right.
I mean,
And
actually, he told me flute to flugelhorn was the hardest transition of his. Going from trumpet to flute was the only time he really had to make a physical adjustment. Trumpet to saxophone, he didn't feel any problem with that. And but it's funny you mentioned from flute to flugelhorn. But
it's a very hard transition to make. Not that I played flute, I played around a tiny bit with it, but I never could say I played flute. But that would be an extremely hard adjustment. He did it. You would never know he was even adjusting to it.
Could you move a little to your right, Mike? So
sure. Okay, is that better?
That's much better. Yeah.
Okay.
That beautiful face of yours. So, when was the first time that I know we sat in with Ira together, you and I?
Yeah.
I was 17, you were 18, I think.
I was 19.
You were 19, right?
Yeah.
And I was 17, and we.
It was a couple weeks later we came back, and I was allowed to sit in. You and me sat in the last set, and I remember we played "No Greater Love." And I remember that I was so nervous. My knees were shaking. I couldn't even get up on the stand without a little bit of help. I was so nervous before I played with him. But one of the things that stood out that I didn't know till he told me, one of the first lessons out of countless ones that I couldn't even count how he mentored me, was telling me that I was comping a little too much in the high register. But he liked my playing. He saw something. And Bobby sounded wonderful as usual.
Well, you did. I remembered we were very happy that night because the music had really gone nice, and we got a chance to share that bandstand with Ira, which every time we got that chance was a joy. I mean, it was such a joy to just make music with Ira, and you and I were on our toes because we've been practicing so much together.
Yeah,
we would practically never sleep, and. So
we were listening to records when you'd think we'd be going to sleep. We were listening to records.
That's right. Besides, whenever we took a break, we were listening to records, and that was, you mentioned ways in which Ira mentored us, and people mentioned, well, Ira didn't technically know music in the conventional sense, but he managed to teach. I would tell people he would tell you just a little phrase, like he told me once about paraphrasing a ballad, that that's what Bird was doing with Embraceable You, and Lester with These Foolish Things, and we listened to records together, and he showed me different paraphrases, and he says that's the approach you need to take. So just that was one lesson I got, and things about the. What did Ira actually? Can you remember other ways in which Ira mentored you?
Mostly. He would tell me when I was either when I was in the zone or out of the zone, and he mostly told me because I had a tendency to be over analytical taking the jazz classes at UM. Nothing wrong with the jazz educators, but I was a little bit too analytical when I would go up there, and Ira had to tell me, "You're not at the university now, man. You're here to play." That was the biggest thing that he had to keep telling me. And I remember once. I remember another time sitting in with him, and I was saying, "Oh, I'm not getting what I need playing with the rhythm section at the school. Could you please let me sit in again?" And I screwed up the set. I think I even screwed up the tune People. And
it's a pretty complex tune, actually.
Yeah. But he was tough when he needed to be tough, because he said, "Sorry, folks, but he just had to sit in. But he was tough in the right way. That was the right way for me. Some people might have too thin a skin, but Ira, along with my jazz piano teacher, Vince Maggio, knew that I had thick enough skin to be able to take it. And they were tough with me when they needed to be tough with me.
That's interesting. Yeah, he would do that. Yeah. And
so anyway, the next time we played a bossa, and I remember you and I were listening to they had the Baixoto Trio, the Brazilian group playing.
Baixoto, right? Was the other group that played opposite Ira, and I would often sit in with them, and it had the great drummer, the Brazilian drummer. What was
Machado?
Yeah, Machado.
Machado?
Edson Machado, who's sort of like the Brazilian Elvin Jones. If you mention him to Brazilians, they're like, Machado, and Manuel Guzmán on bass. I remember that.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
I remember that the first time I played a bossa with Ira, I was like comping voicings almost like I was comping for a swing tune. But after Ira mentioned about, you're playing a bossa now. And when we were listening to Baixoto, it rubbed off of me, and I played more of the correct kind of textures to make it easier for the other people to play with me, where I was in the pocket with them.
Yeah, well, he could just point you in the right direction like that.
Yeah.
Just listen to this, and you'll understand that. He knew exactly what you should listen to, and that intellectual part of it was interesting because I had started out wanting to be like Ira, which I still want to be, but in the sense of I didn't want to know the technicalities of music. I was trying to do everything by ear because that was how Ira did it. And also I'd met Stan Getz and he did it like that too.
Yeah.
But then when I got that scholarship to Phil Woods' camp, Ramblerny, Phil, who knew harmony inside out, said to me, look, it's not going to hurt you to play more piano and to understand how changes work and that kind of thing. So, that when you and I hung out,
yeah,
that was another part where you helped me by finding that balance between, which it's all about in a way, the intuitive and the intellectual, the intuition and the intellect. Because, Ira told you were too analytical. And then I'd say, maybe I'm getting too analytical too, because you and I would analyze everything, to play stuff like in 12 keys, you got analytical sometimes.
Yeah, right.
Remember, we just play passages of the tune sometimes over and over and see what went on in increments, But
we did everything. We would try to match whether it was rhythmically, melodically, or harmonically, match the way each other played. We tried to with our ideas have our own voice where we're not just sounding like we're trying to follow one another idea wise all the time, to still be able to play with our own voice. But we did everything we could to try to get our ideas and to get the whole song in the context of the whole song, not like thinking of just an idea per se, this idea and that idea, but to really be able to play the song.
Yeah,
and I learned so much of that from you, and I learned that from Ira, because I remember there was a period where every solo I would just have a part of the melody to be in every idea, because I wanted to be able to get that to where I was like really playing the tune when I was soloing. Sometimes you can exaggerate that, but it was a part of my development.
Yeah, well, I remember that Ira would talk about there's a part of the tune where you want to make reference to the melody, and then there's parts where you make no reference to the melody.
Right.
You just play the harmony. And like that everything is a balance between these things. So, in a way, I think both of us always had this, like a shadow over us. We'd say, well, what would Ira do? There was always that.
Right.
We'd play, and even on piano and on horn, we'd be just thinking, well, in this situation, what would Ira do? And that was a large presence in our development. Just, well, let's do this. Ira did this tune like this the other night. What if we try it such and such, and then even if Ira hadn't done it, what would he do were he to play this
What
tune?
would he have done with that tune?
What would he have done with that? So that's the way he was influencing both of us in that way. Today we have two old friends of mine and people that were very close to Ira, personally and musically, being the pianist and the drummer with different incarnations of Ira's groups, but the last one being the outer InterContinental Quintet, which was, they'll explain a little more of that. But, Ira touched so many lives and really affected us all so deeply. As I've said many times before, I knew Ira since I was 13 years old. And he was probably the deciding factor in my turning to becoming a jazz musician as my life's pursuit. And so I'm very happy to have with us today these two wonderful gentlemen, great players, great people. We have Mr. Brian Murphy. Hi, Brian.
How are you, Bob?
Okay, very happy to have you here. And
yeah, happy to be here.
Brian's the pianist and wonderful drummer, Mr. John Yarling.
Hi, Bob.
Hey, John. It's funny. I have this image of you in my mind, and I haven't seen you. It's been a long time. Brian, I've seen a little more recently. Well, at least 15, 20 years ago, about 18 years ago, we saw each other in Florida. But you, gosh, I think must be 30 years.
Yeah.
And other than your gray beard, you look exactly the same. It's wonderful.
I wish I felt the same.
Yeah. That's another story. So the inner-outer continental.
It's actually the inter-outer continental quintet.
Inter-outer continental
Quintet.
And Brian was telling me the reason it was named thusly was
we had a trombonist from Australia, Jeremy Gregg. We had a drummer from Iceland originally, Einar Skeving. We had Don Miller playing bass from New York. We had me playing piano from Canada. I think that's everybody. And then, of course, Ira,
Ira,
the chief, the big chief. And it was the thing about the band from the inception to right on through. We never rehearsed. Matter of fact, we had a rehearsal one day, and we rehearsed and played through about 25 songs that we never played in performance.
I've been in bands like that. We had Chet Baker hated to rehearse too. And once in a while, I think in 3-4 years with him, we rehearsed twice. We had a concert coming up. And I remember we played this tune called Ganid by Tad Dameron. And we rehearsed it and we didn't play it. And about a year later, he called it. He went into it and he started to play it with the intro and Harold Danko. And we kind of looked at each other and I remembered most of it, but the rest of the band, bass player and everybody else was just sitting, staring at each other like, and Chet was very disappointed afterwards. And his famous line was, "We rehearsed it."
Well, that's the funny thing is about people with that kind of concept. Rehearsal is another performance, a different performance of the same thing. And the idea that you play something and then you play it again removes the freshness from the whole feeling. the authenticity. It just disappears and it becomes stale. You keep repeating it.
Yeah, well, some people feel that way. Even I was told the Honeymooners, the famous story with Jackie Gleason, he didn't rehearse.
No, he did not
Rehearsals were
rehearse.
done by an understudy who would read his lines and this and that. And when he came in, that was the performance.
Yeah.
And, I think that's, especially when you're working. When you're a working band, there's no need to rehearse.
Right.
You iron things out on the gig. What
Well-
didn't go so well? You remember what didn't go well the night before. Oh yeah, that part was a little rough. I didn't really learn the bridge the way I should have known that. And so you don't even need coaching. You know where it should be better. And but I think these days it's harder that way because especially people are playing a lot of original material, and they they don't have the night to night thing.
No,
to
the
get
6
it
nights a
together.
week that's not there anymore.
Yeah, it isn't there.
No.
Even 3 nights in a row is rough to
Yeah.
get. So
Yeah.
I think that was. I mean, Ira was. I think he was 7 years at the Rancher. I don't know how long, but it would have been ludicrous to rehearse when you're playing 6 nights a week. And
Yeah.
Well, Bob, also, he didn't do it as often later on as he did early on, like in the late 70s, early 80s and stuff. But Ira would just launch into a song that there not only had it never been rehearsed, it had never been played, and everybody on the stage didn't even know what the song was sometimes, and he just expected you to hear him play it through one time and then find your way.
yeah, well, he did. He did what Walter Bishop. I've talked about that with someone else too about this idea that they telegraph you the chord changes through playing a phrase. So you might say, I took one look at you, ba-da-da, and that's like you're a little into the third. That's a 1 chord. What did I do? Ba-ba-da. I had an operation, so I can't sing, but they'd hit the flat 6 of the key there, ba-ba-da-ba-da, which is the minor third of the key of minor third above the back door. Then my heart stood still. Ba-da-da-da, turn around. And they just with these little notes, a little note here and there. Ira was a master of that.
Yep.
I think that was how he I've heard Sonny Rollins do the same thing. And Walter Bishop told me that Bird used to do that too. He mentioned the tune Hey There. He told me that story that it was in the Broadway show. And I think it was Pajama Game or Damn Yankees, the original show that it came from was kind of popular, and that he had never played it. And he was sitting there and Bird played it, and Hey There, you with the stars in your eyes, you never made my ba-ba-dee-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da. That's a 2-5-2. You get into it like that. So Ira, being somebody who didn't know, quote, technically anything about changes, but he knew all the sounds that were associated with the change. If it was a diminished chord,
Well, that's real natural talent. That you don't need to go to school to know how those sounds are supposed to be, and what they're supposed to say to you, and how you can interpret them, what you can do with them. It's a very natural ability, and not that many people have this ability, just to be able to. And the thing is that I worked with him. We were at the University of Miami together from 2007 to 2019, teaching what they call the Young Musicians Camp, and he would basically lead by example. He did not get down to parsing the changes and all this sort of mathematical theorem and all these kind of things that a lot of music teachers, this is what they go for. He had a very kind of natural way to get the feelings that he wanted to get across to the students, so that at the end of the summer, you wouldn't believe the improvement in some of these kids.
I was curious about that because I hung out with Ira, from the time I was 13, and I played duets with him. I played in musical situations he let me sit in, and so I really learned through osmosis. You know, he never really told me anything about
No,
the method, except it was just to play, and you
right.
learned the melody of the song, and then you kind of felt where the harmonies went. In my case, I learned changes so I could name them as well. But you know, that was how you do that. The only time I heard Ira actually take something apart to play it was when he was learning Central Park West.
Yeah.
He had a very bad night at the Rancher one night where he was trying to play Central Park West.
Yeah.
He knew that he didn't make it. He was just playing it. It was the very first time I think he played it. And I said, "What are you going to do about it?" I said, "How are you going to learn that?" Because he was very. I remember we were having a cigarette outside the club, and he was shaking his head and flagellating himself, saying how I couldn't hear it. He said, "I just couldn't get it. I don't know where. How do I play? Where does it go?" And he said, "What I got to do is I've got to take it apart and see where the melody goes, and hear what's under it, you know." But he would do it melodically by himself. He would go aside and then he would figure out the movements. Because the thing he did know about chords, when people said he didn't know about chords, he knew. It's like he doesn't know anything about chess. He's never studied great chess games, but yet he can play a great game of chess because he knows how the game works. He knows that there's a queen and a king and there's this and that. So the bit that Ira did know, he knew there was a tonic. And that
Oh yeah.
moved from the tonic to other places. Because I know this as a fact because I would get lost. When I was 15, 16, hanging out with Ira, we'd play something. And I remember playing What Is This Thing Called Love with him and like trying to figure out where the bridge went.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because we're there in F minor and to C. I got that part. And then I saw you there. What a wonderful day. Da, 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 da.
Mm-hmm.
And he said to me, he said, it goes, how did he say it? Up a fourth and then down a step. Yeah, I think it was because it's from B flat to
Yeah, up to B
flat.
2-5 to B flat and then down to A flat. Yeah.
Down a step was the A flat seventh, which
Yeah.
actually was down a step and then up a minor third, if you were technically to do that. But to him, he knew that it was up a step from where it ended before, which was C, and then he was going to go down. From there, there was an A flat, which was an A flat dominant seventh. So technically, Phil Woods would have told you it goes to B flat and D flat, because the A flat seventh being 5 of D flat, you know. But Ira just knew that it went to B flat, and then it went down a step to A flat 6.
Right.
And that to him was his harmony. But he knew what keys. He knew he was going through different keys. You know what I mean? But he just didn't know the names. And like Jerry Mulligan, I always say, said about Chet. He said Chet knows everything about changes except their names.
Yeah, it's the same kind of thing. Yeah, exactly. He also was a better reader than most people realize.
Well, he got that together with the Baker's Dozen.
Yeah.
Because he really didn't read very well. I mean, he could recognize.
Yeah, at the beginning he didn't read.
You know, but if you put some music like in front of him slowly, he didn't sight read, but he would take it apart. He could take it home, and he could read it measure by measure. And then if he heard the melody, if you played the song for him, he'd get it quicker that way.
That's the curse of the naturally talented, is that you, like Errol Garner, when someone came up to him and gave him a hard time because he couldn't read, he said, "Look, man, no one can hear you read."
No one can hear you read. Well,
no one can hear you read.
Put a piece of music in front of me. I'm like the electric guitar player joke. You know, I'm like sitting there and I'd have to like look at it because for one moment, people don't know it. I go through a total panic because I remember my father. And so I've dealt with it with my analyst, so I won't go into it here. But that one moment of that totally panics me. But Ira said, listen, the thing you got to do, he said, you're playing in a section, right? So what you do is you're playing third. They're not throwing you on lead alto. He said, so you know, as long as you're in section, you listen to what the lead guys play. He said, you don't have trouble reading the notes, do you? I said, no, notes I'm cool with. It's the rhythms. He said, right. So he said, but you hear rhythm well. I said, yeah. He said, so play the lead guy's rhythms with your notes. You'll just be a little bit behind him, and then you can tighten it up the next time. And that was his reading method. I said to people, well, you know, Ira Sullivan taught me to read.
Well, it's so great, you know, to hear these stories, because the one you're telling now about Central Park West, I realized years later when he would be put into situations and stuff when people had original music or something that was harmonically was, you know, more dense and more sophisticated, that I would see him do exactly what you said. You know, I could hear him do that. He could always find a way to weave through something that sounded right and that was sounded like it fit and was logical. It might be a very melodic take on something, but he could always manage to do that. And I don't know what he was thinking in his head. Like, I don't know if I was cutting that or not, but he had that uncanny ability to really find a way. I saw him sitting with Jack DeJohnette one night, and Jack DeJohnette said, "Oh, Ira, what do you want to play? A bebop tune?" And Ira said, "No, Jack, I want to play your music." And Jack was like, "Well, Ira, this stuff's, you know, it's kind of, there's a lot to it, you know." And Ira was like, "No, no." And they went back and forth for about 2 minutes. And finally, Jack said, "Okay." He called some tune. And just what you said about being fearless, we know how fearless he was.
Yeah, right.
Nothing slowed him down at all. And boy, I'll tell you what, he dove in and he found a way to make it work. You know, it was like,
But Ira was not, if you talk about Dad and you think about the page, I think about a classical musician. When I think about Dad, I think about the written page. With Ira, you don't even see a page. You just see and hear and feel everything that the universe had to offer, you know, like that God gave music to Ira and Ira gave music to the world. And the world that he exposed his music to was changed by it. And I attest to that because his music changed my paradigm of music and always has been the most exalted. And I say that again, his music was the most exalted at the Unitarian church where he used to play. And I used to visit him during my university days. And even before that, when I came back from high school. And even before that, like when you were around, we used to go and see him at the Unitarian church.
Right, whenever I'd come to visit Miami, I usually came out.
Right. He'd be playing with
I'd sit in with him.
Tony, right? Tony, there was Tony, there was Steve Bagby,
Joe DiOrio.
Joe DiOrio, right?
Yeah.
I mean, for years, I mean, it was them, and then there was, and then they brought in the university people like, you know, Jocko and everybody, Hiram and Mike Levine, all these people. Gerber, of course,
Yeah,
right.
Mike
So
Gerber.
when I was at the university, I played a concert. My only concert with Ira was actually filmed. I don't have a copy of it, but they have it at the university because when I made my album with Ira, like Ira actually wanted a piece of this album. Like he made this album with me. He's on 4 songs of this album. And
I want a couple too.
and you are to Bob. I mean, you and Ira are my incredible shining stars on this album, but I wouldn't have made the album if it weren't for Ira. Bottom line, I wouldn't have even been singing if it weren't for Ira because I didn't really have any confidence in any of that. You know, I don't know. It was just like I wasn't really sure-footed in a performance-rooted way, and the university was really a shocking kind of experience for me. You know, performing in front of like 100 critics. You know, like when
You were in fast company too. I mean, your 2 best friends in the vocal department that you hung out with all the time were Phyllis Hyman and Carmen Lundy.
Exactly.
3 of you were kind of like a little trio pair, you know, not a pair, but I mean, you traveled as a 3.
I guess you could call us the divas of the department, you know, at the time, right? Like,
Yeah,
you know,
right, the divas.
but you know, and I mean, Phyllis, and there was also Terry DeSario, you know, Steve Bagby's girlfriend, you know, or wife at one, I'm not sure, but Terry was oh my God, what a talent she was. So her voice was as sweet as sugar. It was beautiful. And these women, you know, were amazing, amazing musicians. And I had such a wonderful, you know, even though, you know, you're competing on some level, you're so, you know, it's like your own kind, you know, it's pretty amazing experience, but there are not many of us, you know, there really aren't a lot of women in the club. But anyway, Carmen has managed to sustain. So getting back to Phyllis and Ira, the whole thing, when I learned via you, when you told me Phyllis had departed, I had just moved into my house in Massachusetts, just bought the house, 1995. and I bought a piano, the first thing I bought in that house. All I saw was a corner with that baby grand piano. I bought this baby grand piano, and I was sitting at the piano wondering, should I just start taking lessons again, or should I just start writing and just do what I want to do? And you called me and you told me Phyllis had died, and I was in total shock and disbelief. And it was almost as if, like I had not been singing, I hadn't been doing music, I had gone back to school, I had a master's in health, and I was working in a real, in the real world, and it was really a completely different thing. And that I was sitting at that piano, and after that night, I started to, it occurred to me, that no, I'm not going to be taking piano lessons. I'm going to be writing, because all I did for like 5 years after that moment was write. And then after that time, and I started to work with John Paul, who it was a 2-year waiting list before I could work with my first producer. And then I started to send some music to Ira, and then that's how that evolved. And then he said he wanted to be on it, and I'm like, oh my God, this is like the best thing ever. And that's how the album evolved. And then of course you came on it, and I think the music on that album, just musically, I think everybody just gave me the best of their love, and I'm
Beautiful
so
record. I mean,
grateful.
Denny Zomo did a great job. Everybody, the arrangements were
That was
beautiful.
the second album, right? The second album was with Vinny. The first one, is with Ira. Oh, Ira's family owns part of this. If it ever made any money, they would own a piece of this. So there, I'm putting it right there. And he is on it. He's amazing on it. He plays alto flute on Corcovado. If no one has ever heard the alto flute in and of itself, I mean, you can go to my site and listen to Corcovado, and just to hear his alto flute. And then on Fever, he plays his muted cornet. I think so, yeah. And it was his playing on Fever was incredible. And then he also was on Midnight Oil on trumpet, and it was
The original, yeah.
so it was a really wonderful, I guess, closing the circle. But of course, the ultimate problem was that I wasn't able to go out and perform the album because I had an accident, which threw me off my game to be able to perform. And that kind of just like, it was kind of downhill literally for my, and I felt so disappointed. I mean, so bad about disappointing him, because I had all the arrangements are existing, I have all arrangements done. I have every piece of music that was in that record, but the point is that I felt a certain, the last time I saw him was after I had produced the record. It had not, yet hit the stands, but I went down, and a couple times I saw him with Joe. I sat in with Joe DiOrio. We did Stablemates, and Ira walked into the club in Coconut Grove, and that was a time when we spent. When we started talking, we just couldn't stop talking. So it was like it was incredible. It was just always so much to catch up on, because we didn't see much of each other in our adulthood, but
Yeah.
it was such quality time whenever I saw him. And the last time we went to the Fish House, and I was intending on buying he and Charlene dinner for all the wonderful work of the album and everything. And he said, no, he bought me dinner. And then we went back to the house, and we just all it was just a beautiful, beautiful evening, and I'll never forget it. And that was, but I did speak with him, after that, maybe like semi-annually, it continued to speak with him. And it was always just such an honor and a pleasure to hear thoughts and his feelings about whatever it was he wanted to share with me. And I was just grateful, and I'm still grateful that, someone, his exalted being, has touched my life in a way that I was blessed with that. And I'm grateful, and I will always be grateful for that.
And once again, you can't overemphasize how his stepping in and letting us live in his parents' house really saved us from
Homelessness,
homelessness.
or
Really.
being dispersed as a family, because mom would have
kept us together.
Right, he kept us together. He did. And it was his love and his generosity, his big heart, and his spirit that will live on in us and in everybody that knew his beauty and was touched by it.
That's beautiful. How did you get to know Ira? How did you meet him? And let's start with that. How did that your relationship with Ira come about?
Well, it was 1990. No, I got the dates wrong. It was 1988. Okay, 10 years after I first got hip to Ira from a record that was given to me by the manager of Sam Goody's, where I sold records in Philadelphia. The record was called Peace, which I'm sure you're probably familiar with.
That duets with
And-
Joe DiOrio.
Yeah. And it was just a beautiful record and I loved it. And 10 years later, I met Ira when he was doing a gig at Gatsby's, you may remember, in South Miami at the Holiday Inn. He was working there with Gerber, and I think it was Guy. Yes, it definitely was Guy on drums, Guy Viveros. I think it was Don Kaufman, the late Don Kaufman, on bass. And I sat in on a tune that I had never played before, but fortunately it wasn't too hard to hear. It was That's All.
Okay.
So after that, after the gig, we hung out, Ira and Guy and I. And from that point, little by little, Ira and I struck up a friendship and then gradually started to play together. First, it was flute. It was, well, when he'd come over and we'd do some practicing at my house, it would be flute. And after that, bass flute. He brought me to the Central Pennsylvania Jazz Festival. And I played on, I think that was, I played alto flute then with him on a tune called Mojave by Jobim. And little by little, we became very, very good friends. And then he invited me to accompany him to Chicago, where he used to go every year to play the Jazz Showcase for Charlie Parker Month. He would close off the month and host the after hours jam session. So that was 2008. And we took about 14 trips, because initially we took 2 trips a year, and then it was 1 trip. And we did that until 2019. So
That's a lot of conversation, too. I mean, all the hours in the car. I mean, you know, probably listening to music quite a bit, but also, you know, Ira was a talkative cat and liked to discuss many things. And I'm sure you had some very profound discussions with him.
Yeah, we had some good talks, and we also had a lot of quiet time too. And we like to listen to classical music. Whenever we get to the classical station, we'd be thrilled to know that there was classical. And sometimes we'd go through the areas where they had country music, and we'd listen to a little bit of that. And we had a lot of adventures on the road. You know, we had so many. We would say to each other, "Man, think of all the moves we made when we get back. You know, think of all the moves we made in that trip." You know, and it was just great because we both loved to drive. And the funny thing was that in Chicago, wherever we go, people would say, "Oh, Mark, you know, really appreciate you driving Ira. You know, he's getting up there and blah blah blah." And I'd say, "What are you talking about? He's my chauffeur."
He liked to drive.
Yeah, yeah. So when he'd get tired, I'd take over, and vice versa, and we'd rest in the rest area. Sometimes we'd drive straight through from Florida to Chicago.
Wow.
Otherwise, we'd stop at our halfway point in Georgia. We had a place that Ramada we used to stay in.
Wow. Well, that wouldn't be a halfway place. I think that would be like more like a third of the way place, Georgia.
Well, it was almost halfway, I think. It was about 12 hours.
Oh.
So he said, "Welcome to my world, Chicago." That really was incredible to experience. So many great musicians. I got to play with great rhythm sections, and you know, he was quite patient with me because I really was not a full-fledged jazz musician by any means, but I could play flute, and I played tenor before that, And one of your guests, Brian Murphy, was somebody I worked with I worked with him a few times, of course, with Ira. But when he and Jamie Owsley, a fine bass player from Miami too, did a job with me that I got hired to do at the Breakers in West Palm Beach. It was a kind of a society gig, and there I was calling Equinox. And Brian thought it was a little odd that I was playing that kind of music. And, I didn't know a whole lot of tunes. But huh?
That was not in Lester Lannon's repertoire.
No, no, not at all. So after that, Brian told Ira about my tenor playing. And then I sort of worked the tenor in and started working the tenor in with Ira, which was great. Ira was very open to me fulfilling as much musical growth as I could, all the way to shakuhachi, which I played with him too a few times.
Wow. Yeah, Ira liked to cultivate people's growth. It was very important to him to, I sat in with Ira when I was a teenager and could hardly play at all. I've been playing about 2 years. First time he let me play I was 15, and all I could really play was blues and F. I hadn't gone to Phil Woods' camp yet, but I had copied a bunch of Charlie Parker phrases and had sung along with a lot of records, but, had never really played with rhythm sections. And Ira would bring me up the last set when there weren't many people there.
Yeah.
And let me sit in and get lost and do all those things. And he was quite tolerant of that and would explain to me ways that you wouldn't get lost. And, or give me little hints. People said he didn't know chord changes, but I remember we were playing something and the bridge was like a honeysuckle rose type of bridge. And he said to me, it was an F. He said, bridge goes to B flat and then to C. So something like that. So he knew more than I thought that I was told that he knew. He knew that a song had a tonic and it went to some other keys.
Oh, yeah.
Which is like the basic idea. He knows that if it were chess, that there's a king and a queen, and the queen has a lot of power, and the king is something you're trying to capture. And if you capture the king, the game's over. And if you only know that about chess and which direction the pieces move, you could actually be a fairly good chess player, just playing intuitively. So that's what I always reminded, Ira knew the bare basic necessities of whatever harmony and theory were, just in the sense that, he knew a tune can be an F, but it doesn't stay there, it goes somewhere else. And then he knew it went in a certain direction. It went to other keys that were, and that was pretty much how he thought. And that pretty much was the way Chet Baker thought, and the way Ira Sullivan, the way Zoot Sims and Stan Getz and other cats that didn't really have the harmonic foundation that people like Sonny Rollins or Coltrane or even Charlie Parker or those people, they understood harmony on the individual level of what the chords meant and all that kind of thing. But Ira knew enough. Somebody once said about reading music. I forget. Yeah. They asked somebody, "Do you read music?" And he said, "Not enough to hurt me."
Right. Well, it's really incredible because there are so many musicians who know all the theory and the harmony inside out. And I think you're one of them. But I think you also have the intuitive abilities too. So you really have a great gift there. But my point is that there are those that know so much theoretically, yet, as Kenny Barron would say, there's no heart in the music. I saw him saying that, and it's really interesting because the intuitiveness and the ability to just let it come through is a gift. I think it's a gift, and it's something that I don't think can be taught.
Well, it can be taught in a way. I think also what Kenny mentioned, because I read a little bit of that too. It's been kind of going around the internet of late, of Kenny saying people playing with their heads and not their hearts.
Right.
It's taught in the way, for example, the way you learned from Ira the way that I learned was when you played with someone, when you actually took the bandstand experience with somebody and kind of had to just avoid stepping on yourself as much as possible and realizing that you were going to make a fool of yourself anyway because these guys were really good and you weren't going to sound good next to them for maybe a long time to come. But at least at this moment, you just try to stay afloat in this very deep water you found yourself in, and just try to sink. And that's the real education. That's what Kenny was saying, the way that people were educated. He said, like in his day, you got a record and you learned everything. You learned all, you got like say Miles Davis, I used that example of the Roundabout Midnight record. Not the movie, but the record that Miles made with Train, Red Garland, Paul Chambers, and Philly Joe. And, you sang everybody's solos. The whole thing. You sang what Miles played, you sang what Coltrane played. Even if you didn't hit every note, that wasn't the idea, but you understood how they phrased. You just did that with a whole bunch of recordings. And then you got on the bandstand as often as possible. And you kind of learned like that, as opposed to an academic way. The academic thing went along with it. When I'd ask Jackie Byard how he thought of harmony, or Wynton Kelly would show me something, and Kenny Dorham would show me about diminished chords. But that was supplementary to the actual experience of the playing, which, you were fortunate that you got the real education with Ira, was giving you the true college, the true conservatory of the streets. And, which is how Ira learned. And, none of those Chicago guys, a lot of them studied with this guy named Captain Dyer, who was a high school band teacher that seemed to teach everybody, in Chicago. Not Ira, but he knew him. But other than that, nobody had university degrees in those days. It was not something that happened. You just got out on the street when you could play your horn and played.
Yeah, a different thing. There was no play along records, and there was not the tool. There weren't the tools that exist now. So it was a different.
There were Music Minus One. They did have these LPs with Mal Waldron, did quite a few, and they were actually good. There was a series called MMO, Music Minus One. Yeah. And Hank Jones was on piano on some of them, and they were pretty good play-alongs if you had to do that, but you didn't depend on play-alongs. That was an aspect, one way you could practice. But people played with live musicians, like Ira would say to me, even if you could find one person, play duets with him, a guitar player, a drummer, a bass player, play with play with live people as often as you can.
Yeah, Ira didn't need to have a piano or a guitar or chord instrument. That was one thing that I found very admirable about him, that he could just play by himself. He was so full of music that he could create music without having to have the rhythm section.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today, just 1 week after his heavenly birthday, to honor one of the legends and icons of jazz music, the great Ira Sullivan. Ira was many things: a jazz great, an educator, a mentor, a father, a husband, a friend of mine. And I remember first meeting Ira as a jazz student at the University of Miami Young Musicians Camp Jazz Honor Program. I remember walking in, very young age, I think it was in the 8th or 9th grade, and he asked me to play vibraphone to a jazz song. I had auditioned as a drummer. For me, that was a very foreign thing. I wasn't, hip to the history of jazz vibraphonists. So I felt like he was almost like he was asking me to play timpani and play timpani on a jazz song. But either way, the next day he came in and he gave me a pair of Gary Burton mallets, and he told me to try playing the vibraphone to jazz. And believe it or not, I was still very confused. But either way, that decision changed my entire life. From then on, I started practicing jazz vibraphone and became very obsessed with it. Years passed, and he'd always invite me to come back to perform with him in the new class that he was teaching, all young people that Ira had inspired and lives that were changed. Ira Sullivan also achieved technical skills not achieved by many, a multi-instrumentalist in the truest sense of the word, fluidly being able to play both the trumpet, also the saxophone, the flute, the drum set, piano, and many other instruments. He was born in D.C., but moved to Miami in the 60s to perform and teach. Ira has the ability, and has been, both a jazz great in the history books, but also has remained an accessible educator for artists of many different levels and calibers. Ira mentored jazz greats like Jaco Pastorius and Pat Metheny. He also taught high schoolers at the Young Musicians Camp at the University of Miami, which is where I met him. So today I wanted to honor Ira Sullivan for inspiring so many people. You know, I stopped playing jazz a few years ago, and I've been telling myself I'd get back into it. And just a few days ago, I joined a high school jazz combo from Central Florida, Freedom High School, and played drums on a standard tune. So I'm going to start practicing again in honor of Ira. Rest in peace, Ira, jazz legend and great teacher.
When I got a vintage mouthpiece, I had a beautiful Brillard mouthpiece that I played for many years, a white mouthpiece. And actually ended up playing it for over 30 years. When I first got the mouthpiece, Ira saw it, and I had a plastic cap on it. And Ira said, you know, this won't do. I got a present for you. Come by tomorrow night. Well, we were playing the next night, and he came to the gig with this mouthpiece cap, which is a nice brass mouthpiece cap made in the 1950s. And Ira said he played this mouthpiece cap. He had that on his alto for many years. And he had an extra, so he was going to give me this one. And he gave it to me. And I've played this mouthpiece cap on whatever mouthpiece I've been playing for the last 40 years. So thank you, Ira. There's always a little bit of you with me.
How much Ira loved to close his set with this tune and what it meant, I'll just let the tune speak for itself. Thank you. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you so much for joining us for our special tribute.